You're listening to episode 116 of the D6 podcast.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 podcast. Here's your hosts, Ron Hunter and Jeremy Lee.
This is the family ministry podcast that helps you connect the church and home. And I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Lee.
Yeah, Dr. Lee.
No, I'm not a doctor, but you're a doctor. What is it like to be a doctor walking around and like people not knowing whether you're Ron or Dr. Ron? Is that weird sometimes?
No, not really. It seems pretty normal. You know, when I had a friend who said, well, you didn't call me master when I had my master's, so why are you calling me doctor when I had my doctor's? So, the formalities really should come in when we make introductions of people and when we're on the academic campuses.
Okay.
So, most of the professors I know, they expect the formalities of doctor assigned to their name and any reference on campus. But if you were to meet them in, a restaurant or Target or wherever throughout the week, they expect to be called by their first name. There's no pretenses there.
But it's even more difficult with our guest today because in the D6 family, he's Eddie Moody because you guys love and respect him, and he's close, and he's a friend, and he's been loyal to this movement for so long. But it's important for everybody to understand he's Dr. Edward Moody.
Correct.
We will do it during the interview, but lay out some of his credentials. This man is not to be played with.
He's not
serious.
He has earned his place in the counseling world. In fact, he's published more books at Randall House than any other author that we have published. He has counseled in the prison and in the academic world and in the everyday world for nearly 3 decades now, and he's the associate dean over the counseling department for North Carolina Central University. His credentials are impeccable. People call him literally from all over the world with issues. He's been called in after major catastrophes have occurred for him to counsel in some situations that would be unthinkable for you and I to know. We just wouldn't be able to turn off what he deals with day in and day out. So, again, in the public setting, he's earned his right to speak to this audience about these matters. And the part that I love most about Dr. Moody is when you talk to him, he instantly connects with you, breaks it down, and gives you some real insight into what you're dealing with to where you don't have to think about it like it's something weird or you're struggling or any guilt. I mean, he's going to hit it straight on. And in fact, one of the books that he wrote for us many years ago, he's continued to be called in on situations that he says, I'm getting calls on this, this, and this. And we expanded his original book by 25% more content than it originally had based on some of the situations our pastors and ministry leaders are bumping into. And that book is called First Aid for Emotional Hurts.
Yeah.
Jeremy, that book is designed for people who are teaching, people who are ministering, and they're the ones that everybody comes to and says, hey, I've got a problem, or my wife has a problem, or my husband, or my child. They're coming to you seeking help when they're not going to a licensed counselor. And Dr. Moody gives you enough insight not to set you up to be that licensed counselor, but to be able to know how to deal with that situation, what to do, how to refer, how to understand the situation so that you can be that best first responder, so to speak, because you're the one they trust they're coming to first.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then he's written the booklets for the end user so that, many churches stock up and put his first aid booklets. They're really small, probably 30 pages each, based upon the topic of need, whether or not it's sexual abuse, depression, grief, veterans who are dealing with, post-traumatic or marriage or whatever topic is. Nearly a dozen of those titles that, every church should have 3 or 4 sitting there ready when somebody comes and says, hey, I've got a problem. Pastor can know what to do initially saying to them and then hand them one of his booklets.
And this connects to one of I'm kind of passionate about this. Ministers are not counselors. Ministers are not counselors. No. Ministers are trained.
How often did you counsel when you were on staff at a church?
Because of my passion, I made a conscious choice to refer out. But I think there are a lot of ministers though, who get caught because it's easy.
Yes.
To get caught in the role of counselor.
Right.
But from many perspectives, the fact that you aren't fully trained, even though you have a great heart to help people, you're not fully trained to deal with it.
No.
And then liability is an issue there as well.
I'll tell you something else, too. Most husbands are not going to listen to a pastor who they're not paying. Mm-hmm. They need to have some skin in the game, so to speak, paying somebody in order to work on it so they're not having to come back so many sessions. They can get it done in 1 to 3 sessions or whatever it takes.
So when I'm sharing with ministers and encouraging them, this is what I say. You can give common sense wisdom based on Scripture. That's what you're trained to do. Mm-hmm. You can give common sense wisdom based on Scripture, and then you can refer to a trusted source. Now, this is what I think we don't do well enough. I don't think we actually get a trusted source sometimes. I think whoever the pastor tells us to refer to, we just refer. What I would do is go meet with the counselor I was referring to. Mm-hmm. I would check their credentials. I would ask them denominational questions like, hey, in my denomination, we actually care about this, 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 and this. What do you say about that?
Right.
And then just theological, biblical background, faith development, actually have like an hour-long meeting and ask these questions. Here's what's great about today. Dr. Edward Moody would pass on a lot of those tests.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. On any conservative area of especially coming at it from a biblical standpoint, he believes in that strongly. I want to add to your recommendation to pastors. Not only should you pick out 1 or 2 counselors in your area that you can know and say, hey, I know these people, because your parishioners, your congregation members are going to know, how do you know them? I think you need to go one step further. I think you and your spouse need to go and have a session with them and just do a tune-up or work on something in your marriage so that you can say, I've been there. Because I'm going to tell you, as ministry leaders, we are not above going and seeing counselors at different seasons of our marriage. Mm-hmm. I think it's vital, and I think we all need to do it. I tried to do that when I was pastoring, and I think our pastors need to do that so they can show that humanness of knowing, hey, this is okay, this is a safe place for you to go and do.
And of all the books you guys produce, of all of them, because I'm so passionate that ministers aren't counselors, mm-hmm. I think these books are the biggest no-brainer of just ever, because what they simply are is an opportunity for you to begin a conversation and set up a referral. Why in the world would you not keep these books in stock and just hand to people and say, here's a trusted source that can start the process, and then I want to refer you to a local counselor who can continue the conversation? Totally sometimes I know we can come across to people like, oh my gosh, they're just pushing this and pushing that. But here's the thing. This is not just pushing. This is life, death, serious stuff. And the topic...
these issues done wrong alters family histories.
And this one we're going to discuss in depth today is sexual abuse.
Yeah.
I remember when I was started ministry, unfortunately, I don't think the stat has changed. I need to go find out. But it was 1 out of every 4 kids that I was talking to had experienced some kind of abuse, and many times sexual. And I remember thinking that just about every time I spoke, and I looked out into the audience, and I would just pick 4 kids, and I remember just having that in my mind, that one of that row, according to that stat, has a great chance that they've been through that hell.
Yes.
And I use that word in context here.
Yeah.
And it is incredible, and it's also overwhelming. I've been in multiple settings. I've been director of a summer camp when a kid had said, I've been sexually abused. I've been a youth minister, and I'm going to tell you, it's a scary place to be the person that someone confides in.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Because to know what to do, it's so easy to mess up. It's so easy to mess up. And so this is just not one of those things we can wing. I like to wing things, and this you just can't wing it. And that's what this interview is about.
And your personal preferences do not matter in these cases. There are laws regarding these issues you need to be aware of, but there are also consequences for getting it wrong.
Yeah, I can remember.
You need expertise on this.
I can remember specifically the deacon chairman of the church I was in. The child of the chairman of the deacons was making an accusation. Well, imagine all the different angles to that scenario. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm outmanned and outmatched here. I don't know what I'm doing. And I would have loved to have had Dr. Edward Moody in the interview we're about to hear in that moment. Because this is what I said. I said, walk us through step by step.
Yes.
And that's what he did. So bookmark this, guys. I beg you to bookmark it, keep it, refer back to it. He serves us well in this interview. You would pay money for what you're about to hear. So after the break, we're going to hear from Dr. Edward Moody. And he's going to talk to us about how we help and minister to families and specifically the kids who have experienced sexual abuse in our ministries. We'll be talking to you about that right after the break.
I don't know what to do. Have you ever uttered those words? Perhaps a friend shared with you how their wife had left them, or classmates' parents died suddenly, or maybe the kid that hangs out with your children just isn't himself anymore. There are a lot of hurting people all around us, and we are faced with their problems every day. I'm Eddie Moody. I've worked as a counselor, a psychologist in correctional facilities, and as a pastor. I've observed that there is a lot that regular people can do to help a family member or friend as they're going through some difficult times. I hope you will use this book, First Aid for Emotional Hurts, to answer the call to help those God places in your path.
Well, hey, we have a family member here. That's what we were just talking about. Eddie Moody. Well, I should say Dr. Eddie Moody. You deserve that.
You can say Eddie. Eddie's fine. That's what my wife calls me, and she reminds me of that quite frequently.
She's like, you're not doctor at the house.
That's right.
No, Eddie Moody has been a counselor educator at North Carolina Central University since 1995. That's a long time, man.
It is.
He is a professor of counselor education and chair of the Department of Allied Professions. He also serves as pastor at Tippett's Chapel in Clayton, North Carolina. He basically has no life because he's got all this stuff.
It's true.
He's the author of Surviving Culture, First Aid for Emotional Hurts, helping people through difficult times, as well as the First Aid for Your Health series. We're going to talk about this series a little bit. This series of books is something, in my opinion, every minister needs, no joke. We'll talk about this, but please go ahead and start Googling him now in those books because they're amazing. He and his wife, Lynn, live in North Carolina. Tar Heels or Blue Devils?
Wolfpack.
Oh,
none of the
that's
above.
What I'm talking about.
All Wolfpack all the time.
Along with their two children. We were just talking about your daughter's about to get married.
She is August 4th. So,
and your son's senior year, empty nest is on its way.
We've got one more year. He's a junior. Next year,
he'll
be a
next
senior.
Yeah, so you're like, hey, don't wish that on me just yet.
That's right. That's right. Too much.
All right. So our theme today that I chose for us to talk about is one that I've been wanting to get some good content on for the people that are listening because we've never really fully addressed this topic like I want. And I'll be honest, because it's not a topic really anybody wants to talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
We're going to talk about ministering to students who've been sexually abused. Here's the reality, though. Am I right in the statistic 1 in 4? Is it still like that?
For females.
1 in 4 females have experienced this.
Right.
That means if I'm speaking to a room of 30 kids, let me do my math. That means what? At least 6 of them have most likely had this experience. That blows my mind.
Right. It's hard to believe. Now it involves a lot of things. So it can be, it could be fondling, it could be rape. There's a big gamut there. But yeah, when we talk to kids and boys too, there's a lot of boys worldwide. It's not just the United States that are sexually abused. We're talking to a lot of individuals who've been sexually molested, and it's almost like it's a little bit separate. Once folks get to be older, they're dealing more with sexual assault. There's a lot of that on college campuses and so forth, but it is very prevalent. It's a big problem for us.
Yeah. So I want this to be our time together. As soon as we're told that a student has been through sexual abuse, I want this to feel like a tutorial for a minister who, I want them to be able to dial this up whenever this scenario comes across their desk. I'm hoping they'll flag in their brain this session, and they'll say, oh, wait a second, I've got something on that. Let's walk them through it. They just found out that someone in their group has experienced this, and let's go ahead just for the sake of that they're the first to know about it. Okay, so what do they do then?
Well, be cool, be calm, because one of the things they're looking at is, can you handle this? Can you help me? Now, there's also a part of it, is it happening, like did it happen on our site? Has it just happened? And so that has some implications for what you do as well. So like in the back of my mind, when I'm dealing with someone like that, I'm thinking medical attention. And I want them to see a medical professional as soon as possible. And so if an assault or if abuse, this would be more like assault, but if abuse or something has just happened, you're thinking, I want them to see a medical professional. Especially if they're an older person, they tend to say things like, hey, I don't want to press charges, there's no need for that, or they're saying things like, I just want to get clean. And you're thinking in your mind, get to a medical professional as soon as possible, preferably a hospital. And then they go through and they check them out. If it's a rape or if it's molestation, it's just happened, they'll do the rape kit. And that's where sometimes people are like, hey, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to press charges. And if you're involved, please, I encourage you just to do this. This does not mean you're pressing charges, but this gives us options. This gives them options, like if they need a no contact order later. It creates all kinds of opportunities. Now that's, people that are listening to this, they're going to run into that, where they're going to have an assault. It may not happen to everyone, an assault that happens on their campus, and you want to quickly get to medical professionals. Now, if you're just becoming aware of it, it's maybe something that happened a couple of days ago or whatever, and you're the only one that knows, you're making a report. So as a professional counselor or as a psychologist, one of the things we have to do is make a report to the Department of Social Services. And I would say, even as a ministry ministry professional, that you have those same responsibilities. And so you're listening to the kid, you're talking to the kid, but you're going to make this report to the Department of Social Services, and you just are going to need that later they need to investigate that, they need to see what has happened, and you've just got to have that for the next steps to take place.
I was told that as a young minister, some of these experiences, a student had shared that this had happened, and I was taught at that point, and you can tell me if it's true, that the abuse for many of them, if it's happened over a long period of time, is commonplace to them. So when you hear about it, your reaction, if it's dramatic, it actually shocks them, because for them it's almost normal.
It can be. It definitely can be at times. And so that's more likely the way it's going to go down. This has happened. Now, when we say it's almost normal to them, they get it, that something's off, that something's not right. And the first time it happens, there's a dramatic change. And so even though they may act like it's somewhat normal, you're still going to have they're going to react in certain ways. So they're not going to know boundaries. They may be overeating, or they may have anorexia or be using a substance. So it's still there, Do you want me to read my little poem?
Yes. Yes.
So there's a young lady I worked with, and so actually this is the first work I did when I was still in graduate school. So I worked with sex offenders, and then later I worked with people that had been sexually abused. And so a little girl that I worked with, she was 15 at this time, she wrote a poem about it, and she said, I lay here and it's late at night, Granny's just shut off the light, pretty soon he will be here telling me not to fear. I hear him creeping in the night, and what he does I know ain't right. He's my uncle, I must obey. So once again, he has a way. He has his way. I tell Daddy, but he be blue, most likely say it ain't true. No one knows how much I've tried to keep this secret that I hide. When morning comes, he'll go to work. I'll take a bath, wash off this dirt. I think that I should run away, but that's no use. Where would I stay? And that's really it.
Wow.
So this little girl in particular, she's telling you everything. So she's a real girl. So she ran away, and she ended up going across several states. She ends up being abused again and doing that. In the poem, she says she doesn't think her dad would believe her if she told it. He didn't. She was exactly right. And this uncle's kind of like the favorite. He was, I'd say, 7 years older than she was, so he's a younger brother, younger to her daddy. And so exactly the way she lays it out in that poem, now she's doing this kind of going back in time to when she was laying in the bed there. She knows this isn't right. She feels dirty all the time. She feels like she should get away, but she's trapped. And that's it. That's really where many of them are at.
And when someone has the courage to share with a minister that something like this has happened, this is not usually a spontaneous thing. This is something they have thought about, dreamed about, wish they had the courage to do, and when they do it,
you got to act. Yeah.
We cannot be passive.
And they may sometimes say to you, please don't tell anyone, just please keep this to yourself, but it's almost like when they tell a professional counselor, they know you have to do certain things. Mm-hmm. And so they know deep down, I've told an authority figure, and it's kind of like I put it on their shoulders now. I can feel a little bit better. And so then we have to go forward and take the steps that are necessary.
One situation I was involved in, the young lady was accusing a deacon in the church.
Yes.
That added a whole nother layer.
Right.
Talk to them if that kind of scenario happens, if it's somebody in the church or if it's a staff member or a deacon or somebody significant.
Very, very possible. Still, we have to do the same thing with the DSS reporting, which is something that in a church setting, people are often upset and they're like, hey, what's up with this? For example, our insurance companies would probably say, DSS, then you tell church leadership. That is the first thing. And so we would go with the Department of Social Services, and then we would also have our own investigation, on the inside, although DSS would take the lead. And so sometimes when someone makes an accusation, I think we get too upset or worried about, well, is it true? Well, unfortunately, most of the time it is true, but actually that's not our problem. Our issue is to take the proper steps, like we've reported it where it needed to be reported, then they go through and they investigate. Where we as a church get into trouble is we became aware of something, we didn't act on it, we didn't do anything about it, and that's where we have legal liability, and I would say spiritual liability as well. And so we would have to make sure we reported it. And then also I would say all of our churches need to have good mechanisms set up to prevent those kinds of things, because the church is kind of like the last safe place, if you will, for a predator to go. And so they're going to come our way. And so we've got to really be checking, and we've got to set up mechanisms to protect our kids to make sure things like that do not happen on our watch.
And if you're a minister listening to this, and that law, you may be like, oh my gosh, I've got to report every time I'm creating all this drama. Hey, listen, this law, I love that law.
Yeah.
I want to just hug that law because it frees me up from being the judge and jury.
Yeah.
And I have no choice. So even if it's the deacon, if the deacon's any kind of a person of any kind of integrity, you say, hey, listen, you may not have done this, but I have no choice.
Right. It's got to happen. And they should be good at it. People are often worried, and they're like, well, this is the state. These people will deal with, they're dealing with a lot of reports, and they're doing it a lot. It's kind of like, if you have to call the police to something, you're depending upon that level of authority to do what they need to do. And I'll say also on our end, it usually, it's harder to prove something. So you're going to see situations perhaps where abuse happen, but the Department of Social Services will not be able to substantiate it, and so that's the normal part of it. If you may not be able to get that kind of evidence.
So what do you do then?
Well, if in those kinds of situations we
call Eddie Moody.
Yeah. That's where it gets really messy. But often when they can't substantiate it, it's because they've not followed procedures well. In other words, when it happened, they didn't immediately go to the hospital. They didn't immediately have the rape kit, or they didn't immediately check things out. you teach them about how they have to document themselves, protect themselves. And so let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So they're careful about being isolated. They're careful about, who they trust, what kinds of situations they're in, get themselves into a healthy spot. And almost like if they were in a professional counseling setting, they're working with them on dealing with the trauma of what happened to them. They're also working with them to make sure they don't become a victim again, and because they're really susceptible to it, being groomed to be victimized again.
So let's talk about the parents.
Yes.
Okay, a child has said, I've gone through sexual abuse, and now, and let's just say the parents are not the one that's being accused.
Yes, that's good.
And now we've done our reporting.
Right.
And you did say report to the church staff leadership, right?
Right,
that
right.
You need to make sure they know. Okay, do we tell the parents? If we do, what do we say?
Well, you go to them, and one of the things you've got to be real careful here is, like, even if I'm reporting something, as I'm working with the kid, I'm saying things like, now, we need to tell someone about this, right? And so I'm already doing that from the very beginning, even with the DSS report. I'm going to report at DSS, but we're doing that. You need to talk to your mom and dad about this. Well, this is like this girl says, well, this is the favorite uncle or whatever. Well, but they've just got to know,
But my mom and dad, they'll be mad at me. Please don't tell my mom and dad. Please don't tell my mom and dad.
I really think if they're going to be able to help you, they've got to know. And one of my responsibilities as a person in ministry and authority, they just got to know. Now we could do it where we could do it together. You could talk to them and then they could talk to me, or I could just go talk to them. And so we're trying to give them a little bit of that, but then we do need to talk to these parents. And one of the things that they may be is they may be embarrassed. How did this happen on my watch? How did this go down? They may be defensive. This did not happen. They may minimize it and say it's not that big of a deal. Whoa, So as we talk to them, as we talk to them, we're, number one, trying to help them understand this is serious business. This is a big deal. Well, this happened to me when I was a kid. I got that. I hear you. But, the scripture even talks about this, talks about, the difference between sexual sin and other sins. So when someone violates a person in this manner, it hurts them. It's going to be difficult for them as they date later. And it could make them more susceptible to being victimized and so forth. So you're kind of going along like that. Very often it's a brother or sister that's done it, or it is someone else in the family. And so you're going to try to help them set up mechanisms for protection. Again, DSS has already done their part. They're involved. But one of the things is to just be cool with your kid, love your kid. Don't be upset if they didn't immediately tell. If it's an adult, that adult has often blamed the kid. That adult has threatened them, and in some situations they've even killed animals in front of them. Like, this is what happens to you, this is what happens to your family if you go report this. So you're just trying to get them to be really cool, not let the kid become a scapegoat, be watchful for them isolating themselves, eating issues, self-mutilization, things like that. And probably you're going to need to work a lot with those parents. Kind of like as a consultant, how's he doing? Well, he should be over it by now. Really? When I was a counselor, I worked once with a fellow at the same time that had been a victim of a gunshot. And I was working with a lot of sexually abused kids too. This guy over here that's been a victim of a gunshot is going to do far better, and did far better than the kid that's been molested. It's a different situation. And so you let the kid talk about it. If you're the parent, let them talk to you about it if they want to. When they do, don't get angry. Don't threaten to harm the assailant, because then they're like, well, I can't talk to them about this because then they're going to go and do such and such. You be cool, you be a listening ear, and look for ways that you can help them along.
What are some good practices for ministers to help make their ministry as safe as they can? Because, they do overnight trips, they do away trips, they're riding in cars. What are some ways that we can, as ministers, kind of set up some really good guidelines where we can never make our kids perfectly safe.
Right.
But how can we make them as safe as possible from something like this in our watch?
Really, it's kind of like the 2-adult rule. So you've got 2 adults with you or around at all times. You're watching the places like on your campus or when you're going to make a trip that would be where it'd be more dangerous. The insurance companies usually have like a child protection workshop video, and they'll talk about the sound room, you know, or the dark places or places where there's not a lot of windows. And so one of the things you want to know on your campus, where are the places that folks are more susceptible to molestation or assault? You want to minimize those places. You want to have video cameras there or have windows there. And then you're just trying to watch and make sure you've got you want kids in places where there are lots of people around. And by the way, kids that this has happened to, they need that, you know, because their radar's up, so they don't trust people. And actually one of the things you do with them is teach them you almost don't trust people. They have to earn your trust. And once you feel something is not quite right, you act on it. You move quickly. And so those are things we can do. I think we also need to we need to talk about this. And if you're a minister and you're counseling with kids that deal with this, you've got to know there's guilt. You know, you could hear that in what this girl said in the poem. She talks about feeling dirty. She says she knows it's not right. And so these people have often been told this is your fault. If you didn't look pretty, if you hadn't have come on to me, this would not have happened. So they're kind of coming at it from that standpoint. And you're coming back and saying, this is not your fault. This is not appropriate. And you're kind of talking about, like, you can use the example of Tamar and David's daughter in the Bible. So you knock that down, but then with your best efforts, they're going to tend to still feel guilt. And it can be because of the way their body responded or any number of things. And so if you insist on feeling guilty, 1 John 1:9, you know, the Lord's told us if we confess our sins, He'll forgive us. And if worse comes to worse, make Psalm 51 your prayer. And then if you really look at that, this is a guy that killed someone, right? You haven't killed anyone, but if the Lord would forgive him, if the Lord will forgive the person that did this to you, then He definitely forgives you of whatever culpability you have in this. So you've got to focus a lot on the guilt, a lot of that.
We could go forever. You are such a treasure of wisdom. Thank you so much. I need to talk about this.
Okay.
These books, like you just read this poem, is from First Aid for Emotional Hurts, but you have a whole first aid series.
Yeah.
The best way I can describe it to those who are listening, because I've interviewed you a couple times now, I beg people to buy these books, not because I want anybody to get rich. It's like having a counselor on your bookshelf.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine not wanting to have a resource like this that you could just pull in, because when intense situations happen, they happen quick and they happen now. And sorry, Eddie loves y'all, but he ain't going to just be sitting in your office waiting for a crisis to happen. But his wisdom is there for you if you just put it on the bookshelf. So talk a little bit about this series, why a minister could use, or how a minister could use this series in their ministry.
Well, if they think of all the resources that are kind of like a first aid kit, so like the book, which has just been revised and expanded, this is what you do. This is how you approach things, like the issue about when you learn someone's been sexually abused. So this is what you do. But then there are booklets that are going straight at the person that has a particular issue. And so like the issue we talked about today, there's a booklet called Finding Help. So it talks about, well, what does the psychiatrist do? What's the social work do? What's the Department of Social Services do? That's good for you to know, but it's also good for them. You know, what would I get from a counselor if I were to go get counseling? What should I expect? So there's a booklet that deals with particular areas: grief, depression, sexual issues, which is really more like anything from pornography to same-sex attraction. There's one on ministering in a changing sexual landscape that's also, you know, it's a different flavor, but it's talking about this is how you handle those things. There's really something for about each issue that you would come up with. When you think about what we talked about today, there's a booklet called First Aid for Children with Emotional Problems. And so in there, we talk about hitting it on all three levels, you know, relationships, the way they think, the way they interact in the world, and so forth. And so the booklet is there for a parent to read, but it's also good for you to know, okay, so I'm working on their thinking. You know, the Lord never leaves you nor forsakes you. then I'm working on, okay, so what you need to do is you do this. When you have a panic attack because you've seen someone like this, you do that. So the booklets are good for the person helping, but they're also designed for the person that gets the help. And
That's great.
We encourage folks to take them, and sometimes people are confused. They think that the book is all the booklets are in the book. Some of the material from the booklets are in there, but the book itself is designed, this is what you as a helper do, providing first aid, right off the bat to someone.
Well, if you guys want to find out a little bit more about these books, about this material, we had so much more I wanted to talk about. We ran out of time. We're going to have to do this again. But thank you so much for being with us. If you guys want to find out more about this series, you can go to d6family.com. Dr. Eddie Moody, thank you for being with us, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jeremy.
Scripture and modern-day research attests to this truth. When one generation commits to and engages in the discipleship of another generation, people of all ages know Jesus and become more like him. This commitment requires us to say goodbye to the myopic focus on the next generation and instead broaden our view to every generation. Every generation. Moms, dads, grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles, kindergartners and middle school students, college freshmen and newlyweds, each one awakened to Jesus Christ and living out a vibrant faith with one another. We invite you to adopt this focus at the D6 Conference, a family ministry event built on the Deuteronomy 6 philosophy of generational discipleship. You will experience 3 days of strategy, resources, and action steps to help move your church forward together. Discover what's in store at d6conference.com.
Jeremy, thanks for asking the tough questions. Dr. Moody's always great at answering anything that you ask. And wow, I totally agree. I think there are some ministry friends of our listeners that probably need to hear that, and they need to share the link to this podcast. It's one of those that's a must listen to for sure. If you are not familiar with Dr. Moody's writings, I know we talked a lot about the booklets and his one book, but he's written on other topics as well. Check his name out on Amazon. You know that anytime you hit the author's name that's in blue on Amazon, it goes to their author page and links to all of the books. You can do the same thing with us on d6family.com. You can search by his name. It'll list all of his books.
Or in my case, the only book.
That
some of us have only written one, Ron.
But Dr. Moody has really set the bar high. That's all I'm going to say.
He's got nearly a dozen.
He actually has over a dozen with us, but nearly a dozen on the counseling side.
See?
But he's got Surviving Culture, Parent and Student Edition. He's got Ministering in a Changing Sexual Landscape. Again, just go look at all the titles he's got. Pretty incredible.
And you know what? I just want to go back to kind of how we started. It's pretty special when someone of his caliber, who's done the work he's done to earn the titles that he has, can still make you feel like you're talking to Eddie Moody.
That's right.
And I love that about him. Right. I love that he does not try to in any way make you feel uncomfortable because of what he knows and understands. That he meets you right where you are, and I love that man for that. So thank you, Dr. Edward Moody, for spending time with us. And next week,
we have Larry Fowler, who's going to be talking about grandparenting.
Not just grandparenting, and I think this is characteristic of many of the relationship grandparents have with their families, is when it's distant.
Yeah, there's some geography between you and them.
But emotional distance as well, because maybe there were some issues with the grandparent and the mom and dad. Yeah. That how does the grandparent then create a relationship with grandchild while navigating the tension with mom and dad? Yes. So it's not an easy dynamic, and Larry dives into that with us.
That's great. That's going to be a good episode.
We'll see you guys then, and have a great week of ministry.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com. And if you're a minister, we invite you to join the D6 Leader Network by going to d6leader.net.